This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. We are on the road in Colorado Springs, Colorado. This is the site of military bases, all gathered here in Colorado, Air Force and Army. We are joined by three men. Dave Phillips is the author of Lethal Warriors, which we're going to talk more about in a minute. Andrew Pogany served in Iraq. Graham Clumpner served in Afghanistan. This is the eve of the 11th anniversary of the war in Afghanistan. We're broadcasting from the Tim Gill Center for Public Media, which just opened, was inaugurated last Friday. We're honored to be the first broadcast out of this center, teaching people in the community about civic engagement, citizen journalism. And it's wonderful to be here before a group of people from Colorado Springs. This weekend, we'll be traveling the western slope of Colorado. You can check our website at tour.democracynow.org. We are here with Dave Phillips. Dave, if you can talk about Lethal Warriors, expand on what you said at the beginning, because when you describe these soldiers coming home, going back to war, coming home, going back to war, coming home, Lethal Warriors, what happened on the base? Give us an example.
First, let me say that when we talk about soldiers, the guys that I wrote about, guys that ended up getting arrested for prison, are really young guys. We tend to think of soldiers as, grown-up adults. These guys were 21, 22. Sometimes they weren't even old enough to buy a beer. In Iraq, they essentially were given the mission of finding the enemy, but there was no enemy for them to find. There was no uniformed enemy. There was only IEDs that kept blowing up their friends and often blowing them up. That was a very hard thing for anyone to deal with, let alone someone that young. So when they came home, the Army had a plan to make sure that everybody got screened to make sure they had no mental wounds from this war. And it essentially was that they were all marched into a room and given a multiple choice piece of paper to fill out that said, did you see dead bodies? Did you kill anybody? Are you having trouble sleeping? Are you having trouble with substance abuse? Things that would screen for symptoms of disaster down the road. And these guys all lied, or at least almost all of them did. And they lied because they had been taught in the culture of the infantry that they were tough. They could handle it. And not only that, but if they couldn't handle it, they were somehow a defect that had no business being part of the Army. And so they lied and figured out they could handle it on their own. Now, to be fair, some of them did, and some of them had help from friends. But some of them didn't. And they started doing things that in retrospect, are obscenely dangerous. Young men who'd been taught how to use weapons literally expertly were carrying a loaded firearm all the time around Colorado Springs. They were drinking a lot. They were doing a lot of drugs. And they had this, we all have this inhibition to killing people. It's just part of our human nature that had sort of eroded in them. When you mix together the alcohol, the weapons, and this ability to kill that I think most of us can't even fathom, it was very easy to all of a sudden have bodies. I mean, people were killed for no reason. One man shot another guy for throwing up in the back of his car. Another man just drove around. He would get drunk and drive around with an AK-47 and just shoot people he didn't even know.
I want to read, in 2009 and 2006, 21-year-old Anthony Marquez killed a small-time drug dealer by shooting him repeatedly with a stun gun, then shot him in the heart. In August 2007, 24-year-old Louis Bressler robbed and shot a soldier he picked up on a street in Colorado Springs. In 2007, 3 soldiers from the unit, from Lethal Warriors, Louis Bressler, Bruce Bastian, Kenneth Eastridge, left the bullet-riddled body of a soldier from their unit on Colorado Springs Street. 2 months earlier, the same group intentionally drove into a woman walking to work. One of the soldiers then repeatedly stabbed her. In May and June of 2008, police say Rudolfo Torres Gandaria and Gomar Falu Vives drove around with an assault rifle, randomly shooting people. In 2008, police say John Needham beat a former girlfriend to death. Josh Butler was sent to prison for beating his pregnant wife. Months later, his child was born with severe birth defects and died. Butler blames himself for the child's death. These are horrifying stories.
Yeah, and to a certain extent, what's interesting is that this was going on very much under the radar for Colorado Springs. These guys all tend to hang out in their own circles. They come back from war together. They do everything together. And so it is possible to live even in a city as military as Colorado Springs and feel very removed by from the war. It was only when we started digging that we uncovered how some of these horrific, senseless acts were really all connected to sort of a larger toxin that these guys had brought home.
Graham Clumpner, the end of, as we wrap up now, talk about more what you're doing this weekend.
So Iraq Veterans Against the War has been using an organizing model since a little bit after President Obama was elected. As we've seen on the left in this country, it's been difficult to have an anti-war voice. You know, on the one hand, some people don't want to push too hard, and on the other hand, they think like it's falling on deaf ears. Iraq Veterans Against the War is trying to make some decisions for the long term, because as we look at the Pentagon, they make a 20 to 30-year plan. They talk about climate change. They acknowledge it exists. They're willing to talk about all of the possible future threats. And in the anti-war movement and in a lot of these healthcare movements, we're reactionary. We don't plan ahead. And so this weekend is the beginning of starting to look forward and say, what's the next war? We're not just going to be focused on bringing the war in Afghanistan to an end, bringing all of our soldiers home and reparations for the Afghan people, as well as full health care for our own returning veterans. That is part of what we're doing. But we're taking this as a larger conversation, because as we see the news on Syria and Turkey this week, or we look at Iran and the differences with you know, the European powers in the United States, we are looking at a world that is not going to stop being militarized anytime soon.
Where are people meeting in Denver?
We're going to be meeting at the 27 Social Center. It's going to be right next to the football stadium, and we've got about 20 participants at this point. And it's going to be for a lot of these veterans the first time that they get to talk with each other and share their stories. And on Sunday morning at 11 a.m., which will mark the 11th anniversary of the beginning of the Afghanistan War, we are going to be spending some time for our own memorial. It's going to be the first memorial that we have, because every time we've had to go to these public memorials and stand there and hear all of these lies and hear these things that, you know, are just so broad, that don't deal with the real loss, we're going to be sharing those stories with each other for the first time.
Graham Clumpner, Andrew Pogany, and thank you so much to David Phillips. That ends our broadcast here in Colorado Springs at the Tim Gill Center for Public Media, part of Rocky Mountain PBS. This weekend we'll be in Salida on Saturday, Carbondale, Paonia, Crested Butte, Telluride, and Durango through Sunday. Check out details at our website, tour.democracynow.org, then Moab, Utah, and then we'll be going to Arizona, and then to New Mexico, and then to California, Washington State, and Oregon. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Burke, Renee Feltz, Sarah Martin, Yermeen Sheikh, Steve Martinez, Sam Alcoff, Honey Massoud. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much.